It was barely dawn when the pounding started, sharp, urgent, deliberate, the kind of knocking that doesn't ask permission. Raphael Curtis sat up in bed, disoriented, the thin walls of his mother's small house shaking with every blow. His first thought was that someone was in trouble, maybe a neighbor, maybe one of the old men whose cars he fixed behind the house. But then came the voice. "Raphael Curtis! Step outside! Hands where we can see them!" His mother's bedroom light flicked on. Raphael? He was already on his feet, heart racing. "Stay inside, Ma," he whispered. He opened the door to a sea of flashing red and blue. 6 deputies, rifles aimed low but ready. Sheriff Darrell Henson stood at the center, heavy-set, with that same smirk he wore the day Raphael tried to apply for a part-time job at the station. "Step out, son," Henson said, one hand on his belt. "We're not going to ask twice." Raphael stepped onto the porch barefoot. His breath made ghosts in the cold air. "What's going on?" "You know damn well what's going on," Henson said. "You're under arrest for grand theft auto, county property." His mother stumbled out behind him, robe half-tied. "What are you talking about?" "My son's never stolen anything." Henson ignored her. "Turn around, Raphael." He didn't move. "I didn't steal a car," he said quietly. Henson's smirk twitched. "Then maybe you can explain why your fingerprints are all over my cruiser, the one that got found in the woods last night." "That's because I fixed it," Raphael said. "You brought it to me 2 days ago, the alternator." "Enough." Henson motioned to his men. "Cuff him." The cold metal clamped around his wrists before he could breathe. His mother's voice broke behind him. "Please, he's just a boy." Henson turned. "Then maybe teach your boy not to touch what's not his." They shoved Raphael into the back of the cruiser. He caught a glimpse of his mother in the rearview mirror, barefoot in the gravel, hand over her mouth, watching her son disappear. The sheriff nodded and smiled, not knowing that the black boy he had just arrested would expose everything wrong with the sheriff's department. If you like stories like this, where black oppressors are put to shame and the truth finally revealed, then you will like our channel. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let's get back into the story. The station smelled of stale coffee and bleach. Raphael sat in an interrogation room, his hands still cuffed as the deputies joked outside. Hours passed. No one spoke to him. When the door finally opened, a man in his 50s walked in, wearing a wrinkled suit and the look of someone who'd stopped caring years ago. "Name's James Holloway," he said, setting down a stack of papers. "Court-appointed defense. You're Raphael, right?" Raphael nodded. "All right," Holloway sighed. "You're being charged with theft and destruction of county property. They've got your prints on the steering wheel and gear shift, which, if you ask me, doesn't look great." Raphael leaned forward. "I told them. I didn't steal it. The sheriff dropped it off at my house to fix the alternator. You can ask him." Holloway gave a tired smile. "Son, you're saying the man accusing you of theft also hired you to fix his car?" "Yes. That's convenient." "It's true." The lawyer rubbed his temples. "Look, these cases don't end in fairy tales. You're a kid with grease under your nails. He's the sheriff. I'll see if we can get you a plea, maybe probation if you're lucky." Raphael's jaw tightened. "I'm not pleading to something I didn't do." "That's admirable," Holloway said, standing up. "But admirable doesn't win cases." 2 days later, Raphael stood in court wearing an oversized shirt his mother ironed flat. The courtroom smelled like dust and old wood. Sheriff Henson sat at the prosecution's table, shoulders relaxed, eyes confident. The judge, Martha Kellogg, flipped through her notes without looking up. "State of Alabama versus Raphael Curtis. Charge grand theft auto, destruction of public property, resisting arrest." She finally looked up. "How does the defendant plead?" "Not guilty," Holloway said. Raphael stared straight ahead. The judge sighed. "We'll proceed with preliminary testimony." The prosecutor, a younger man in a navy suit, began to paint Raphael as a delinquent. "He's a known mechanic in the neighborhood, easy access to vehicles. Motive, joyriding a police cruiser for attention." Murmurs rippled through the room. Raphael's mother sat rigid in the back row, clutching her purse. When it was his turn to speak, Raphael looked at his lawyer. "Can I say something?" Holloway hesitated. "Raphael, let's—" But Marcus was already standing. The courtroom stilled. He faced the judge. "Your Honor, I didn't steal that car. The sheriff came to my house 2 days before, told me it wouldn't start. I fixed it. I even left the invoice on his dashboard." The judge's expression didn't change. "You'll have your chance, Mr. Curtis. For now, let your counsel handle the defense." "With all due respect," Raphael said, voice steady, "I'd like to handle it myself." Gasps filled the room. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you representing yourself?" Raphael nodded. "If truth is a risk, I'll take it myself." The judge studied him for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "Very well," she said slowly, "but remember, truth has rules in this room. You break them and I'll silence you." Raphael looked at her without blinking. "Then I'll speak carefully, ma'am." When the hearing adjourned, reporters waited on the courthouse steps. One of them, a young woman with a camera around her neck, Leah Stone, called after him. "Raphael, do you think you'll win?" He shook his head. "I'm not trying to win." "Then what are you trying to do?" He paused at the bottom of the steps. "Make them listen." Leah lowered her camera slowly, realizing she'd just caught the moment that would start a movement. That night, Raphael sat alone in his cell, staring through the bars at the narrow strip of sky. The moonlight fell across his face like a spotlight, soft and cold. Somewhere outside, his mother was probably still awake, praying, and somewhere inside him, beneath the fear, there was a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes when you know the truth's about to walk into a room full of people who've never heard it before. The courthouse smelled faintly of bleach and old wood, the kind of scent that carried decades of other people's verdicts. Raphael sat at the defendant's table, his wrists free now, but his body still held the stiffness of someone who had been cuffed too long. Across the aisle, the deputy, Earl Watkins, leaned back in his uniform, a smug half-smile pulling at his mouth. The ceiling fan groaned. The gallery murmured. When the bailiff called for order, Judge Martha Kellogg took her seat. Her gaze was sharp but tired, the eyes of someone who had seen far too many young black men come through her courtroom and leave broken. Raphael's court-appointed defender, James Holloway, shuffled papers beside him. "Just keep quiet," he muttered. "Let me handle it." But Raphael didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, the fluorescent light catching on the edge of his jaw. When the clerk read out the charge, grand theft auto of a county vehicle, his chest rose once, then fell still. The prosecution began its case. Assistant District Attorney Carla Wren painted Raphael as a troubled youth with a fascination for cars and a disregard for authority. She gestured to photos of the wrecked cruiser, its front end crumpled, windshield shattered, mud caked across the hood. "His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel," she said. "His tools were discovered in the trunk, and the only person with access to that vehicle before it was stolen was the defendant." Every eye turned to Raphael. The boy said nothing, his hands folded neatly on the table. When it was the defence's turn, Holloway stood. "My client maintains his innocence," he began flatly. "He claims he was hired to repair the sheriff's vehicle 2 days before the incident. We intend to show he had no involvement in the theft or the crash." But his tone carried no conviction, like a man reading from a manual he didn't believe in. The first witness was called, Deputy Earl Watkins. He swaggered to the stand, chest puffed out, badge gleaming like a mirror that refused to see its own cracks. He told his story smoothly, how he parked the cruiser behind the station that night, how he found it missing the next morning, how a resident spotted it wrecked in the woods. When the prosecutor asked who had touched the vehicle last, he didn't hesitate. "The boy," he said, nodding toward Raphael, "said he was just fixing it. But you know how these things go." The courtroom chuckled lightly. Even the judge didn't rebuke the tone. Raphael looked up, just once, and in that moment you could see the restraint behind his silence, the humiliation pressed against the inside of his chest like a weight he refused to drop. When Holloway rose for cross-examination, he stumbled through a few mild questions about procedure and shift timing. Then he sat down, defeated. That was supposed to be the end of it, until Raphael spoke. "Your Honor," he said quietly. Every head turned. Judge Kellogg looked surprised. "Mr. Curtis, this is not the—" "Just one question," he said, "please." The courtroom went still. The judge studied him for a long beat, then sighed. "One question," she said finally. "Make it brief." Raphael stood. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Deputy Watkins," he began, "you said you parked the car behind the station the night before it went missing?" "That's right." "And you locked it?" Of course. Raphael nodded slowly. Then can you tell the court why the security footage from that backlot stops at 11:46 p.m., right when your patrol shift ended? A hush rippled through the room. The deputy frowned. What footage? Raphael reached into his folder and held up a printed email. A public record request. Leah, the journalism student, had helped him file online. The station's own maintenance logs mention a camera outage at that exact time, he said. But there's no record of anyone filing a repair report. The deputy shifted in his chair. I wouldn't know about that. Raphael took a step closer. You also said I was the last one with the keys, but that cruiser had a digital ignition. Sheriff's Department models are tracked through the county database. Can you explain why the vehicle log shows movement at 3:14 a.m., 3 hours after you went off duty? The crowd murmured louder now. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Curtis, she warned, do you have proof of this? Raphael nodded. Yes, ma'am, from the log sheet the sheriff's office keeps. It's public record, too. He handed it to the bailiff. The judge scanned it. Her eyes narrowed. Watkins swallowed hard. His confident posture had deflated. Looks like the vehicle moved again, the judge muttered, after the defendant was already home. The deputy's jaw clenched. That log could be wrong. Or, Raphael interrupted softly, someone used that cruiser after hours and didn't want anyone to know. A single sound echoed, the creak of the bench as people leaned forward. Even Holloway was speechless. The prosecutor quickly objected. Speculation, Your Honour. Sustained, the judge said, but her tone had changed. Raphael returned to his seat, but before he sat, he spoke one more time. One last thing, he said. Deputy Watkins said he doesn't know me beyond fixing that car. He pulled out his phone, pressed play. The courtroom filled with static, then a voice, low and unmistakable. Boy, make sure you fix that cruiser before inspection. Sheriff's got eyes everywhere. Watkins froze, his voice on record. The words were thick with the arrogance of someone who thought no one was listening. When the clip ended, the room was dead silent. Leah, seated in the gallery, raised her phone, recording. Her tweet that night would read, 17-year-old defends himself, plays a deputy's own words in open court. The room went silent. Judge Kellogg sat back slowly, her gavel untouched. We'll reconvene after lunch, she said, voice subdued. Raphael didn't look triumphant. He didn't even look relieved. He just sat there, hands folded again, whispering something only he could hear. Maybe it was a prayer. Maybe it was the first breath of someone who finally got to speak. If you're still watching, who do you think is lying? The deputy or Raphael Curtis? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. The courtroom was never meant for silence, but after that recording played, it was like the air itself forgot how to move. The deputy sat frozen on the stand. The words, boy, make sure you fix that cruiser before inspection, still echoed faintly from the speakers, their weight pressing down on every wooden bench and every face in the room. Judge Kellogg leaned back in her chair, lips tight, fingers steepled beneath her chin. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The entire town had just heard what kind of man Earl Watkins really was. The prosecutor's mouth twitched, her pen tapping nervously against her legal pad. Your Honour, that recording could have been doctored. There's no verification. Then we'll get one, the judge interrupted sharply. The court will request immediate authentication and a forensic pull of the cruiser's digital log. We'll see who moved that vehicle and when. A murmur rolled through the room, reporters scribbling, phones lighting up, whispers turning into tiny storms of disbelief. The judge's gavel hit once. Court is in recess until tomorrow morning. As soon as she stood, the courtroom broke apart into noise. Some people stared at Raphael like they were seeing him for the first time, not as a criminal, but as a kid who might just be telling the truth. Others whispered accusations, refusing to let go of the image the badge had given them. Raphael didn't look at any of them. He turned toward his mother. She was standing now, her hand over her mouth, tears streaking her cheek silently. When he saw her, the mask he'd worn cracked for just a second. His eyes softened, and he mouthed, I'm okay. But she shook her head. She knew what okay meant in this town. It meant barely surviving. Outside, the courthouse steps were a storm of voices and cameras. Leah, the young journalist, stood near the edge, her phone recording the crowd. She wasn't filming chaos. She was filming history unfolding. That night, her clip went viral. A 17-year-old defends himself in court and exposes a deputy's lies. She added the tag, "Let the boy speak." By morning, it was everywhere. Inside the courthouse, the mood had shifted. Reporters lined the back walls. Officers stood stiff and silent. The public defender, Holloway, looked like a man who'd aged 10 years overnight. He hadn't slept. You could see it in his eyes. When Raphael walked in, the crowd actually clapped. He froze at the door, caught off guard, then lowered his gaze quickly. He didn't come here to be a symbol. He came here to be heard. The judge entered, and the applause died instantly. She adjusted her glasses, her voice steady. "The forensic report from the Sheriff's Department has been submitted." The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, before that's read, the state requests—" "Sit down, Ms. Wren," Judge Kellogg said. Her tone left no room for argument. "We're reading it." She opened the folder in front of her. The paper trembled slightly in her hand. Whether from age or anger, no one could tell. "It appears," she began slowly, "that the sheriff's cruiser's GPS system recorded movement at 3:14 a.m. several hours after it was supposed to be parked and logged in." The gallery gasped. She continued, voice tightening. "The system log also shows manual ignition override, a keyless start using the assigned officer's security code. That code, according to department records, belongs to Deputy Earl Watkins." The sound that followed wasn't quite a gasp. It was the collective intake of 100 people realizing they'd just watched the ground shift beneath them. Watkins's face turned a deep shade of red. He shook his head, muttering, "That's not right. That can't be right." Judge Kellogg glanced toward him. "Deputy Watkins, would you like to amend your testimony?" He didn't answer. His mouth opened, then closed again. The prosecutor sat frozen, her pen still mid-air. Raphael's mother covered her face and wept. It wasn't the cry of victory. It was the sound of months of fear collapsing all at once. Holloway stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement." Judge Kellogg nodded. He turned toward Raphael, then toward the courtroom. "I've practiced law for over 20 years, he said, and I've seen a lot of defendants come and go, but I'll tell you this young man did more work on his own case than I ever did." He hesitated, the admission heavy in his throat. He found the evidence. He questioned the right people. He believed in his innocence even when I didn't. The courtroom fell completely still. "I failed him," Holloway said simply, "but I hope this court won't." He sat back down. For the first time since his arrest, Raphael looked up directly at the judge, and she looked right back. For a brief second, it wasn't judge and defendant anymore. It was one human being finally seeing another. Judge Kellogg took a long breath. "Given the evidence and the new findings," she said, "this court will be calling for a full review of the Sheriff's Department's internal conduct." Her gavel struck once. "We'll reconvene for closing remarks tomorrow morning." The crowd erupted. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Outside, chants began to echo, not angry but defiant. "Let the boy speak! Let the boy speak!" The sound grew louder, bouncing off the courthouse walls, turning into something bigger than the case itself. Raphael stepped outside with his mother and Holloway. The air was cool now, evening settling over the courthouse lawn. Leah ran up to him, microphone trembling in her hand. "Raphael, do you have anything to say to everyone watching?" He stared past her at the horizon glowing orange over the rooftops. For a moment he seemed far away from all of it, the noise, the lights, the sudden fame. Then he said softly, "I didn't want to win. I just wanted them to listen." Leah lowered the mic. That single line would become the headline by nightfall. By midnight, millions had watched the clip. A 17-year-old boy, standing on courthouse steps, voice calm as the storm around him. And by morning, the world wasn't asking whether Raphael Curtis was guilty anymore. They were asking something far heavier. How many others like him had never been heard at all? Like this story? Subscribe, like, and drop a comment on this video. The final morning came dressed in grey. Rain clouds hung over the courthouse like waiting questions, the kind that don't need answers. Only honesty. Raphael Curtis walked through the metal detectors for what felt like the 100th time, but this time the guards didn't look at him with suspicion. One nodded. The other, a black officer with tired eyes, gave a faint, respectful tilt of his head. Inside, the air felt heavier than usual. the kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters whispered into microphones, narrating the moment to a nation that had been watching for days. Protesters stood outside, their chants muted through the thick courthouse windows. Let the boy speak. It wasn't a slogan anymore. It was a plea that had grown larger than him. Raphael sat beside his mother. Her hand found his, trembling slightly. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you already told your truth." He nodded once. He wasn't afraid anymore. He'd already faced the hardest part, being heard in a world that had long stopped listening. Judge Kellogg entered. Everyone rose. When she took her seat, she didn't look at the cameras or the crowd. She looked at the young man before her, then at the empty chair where Deputy Watkins used to sit. She began softly, her voice measured but lined with weight. "This court," she said, "has spent the past week listening to testimony, reviewing evidence, and hearing the words of a young man who stood on his own before the law. And I will be honest, it has changed me." Every head lifted. Even Raphael looked up. She continued. "The justice system was built on the idea that truth should be defended, not buried. But too often we forget that the truth sometimes comes from the very voices we're taught not to trust." A pause. She drew in a breath that trembled slightly before steadying again. "Having reviewed all evidence, the digital logs, the body cam data, and the corroborating testimony, this court finds the defendant, Raphael Curtis." The room froze. Not guilty. It wasn't a roar that followed. It was a slow, rising exhale, like a room remembering how to breathe. Raphael didn't move. He just sat there, staring at his hands. Reporters leapt to their feet. His mother gasped, both hands pressed over her mouth. Holloway, the public defender, slumped back in his chair, eyes glassy, as if he'd just witnessed something sacred. But Raphael stayed still, not stunned, not relieved, just still. Judge Kellogg watched him quietly, her gavel still resting against the block. "Mr. Curtis," she said, voice softening, "you have your freedom. I hope the world listens to what you taught this courtroom." He nodded faintly. "Thank you, Your Honor." The gavel fell once. Case dismissed. Outside, the sky had opened up. Rain fell in thin silver lines, soaking the courthouse steps, blurring the chalk messages people had written there. Justice for Raphael. Let the boy speak. Reporters swarmed the doors. Cameras flashed. Questions flew like arrows. "Raphael, how do you feel?" "Do you have a message for the sheriff's department?" "What comes next for you?" He said nothing. He stepped carefully down the wet marble steps, his mother beside him. Holloway followed behind, holding a folder over his head that barely helped. The chant started again. Quieter this time, softer, almost reverent. He spoke, and they listened. Across the street, Leah stood under a newspaper awning, her camera rolling, the rain reflected in her lens like shards of light. She didn't shout questions. She just captured the moment. The boy who defended himself, walking out of the courthouse with his head down and his dignity intact. That was all the story needed. That evening the clip went live. No commentary, no headlines screaming for attention. Just a video. Raphael stepping out into the rain, hands in his pockets, not smiling, not crying, just existing. The caption read, "He spoke and they had to listen." Within hours it spread across the country. Teachers played it in classrooms, churches mentioned it in sermons, firehouses, police stations and youth centres during meetings. Some people saw courage, some saw defiance. But the ones who needed it most, the quiet kids, the ones who'd been dismissed, doubted or talked over, saw possibility. They saw themselves. At home, Raphael sat on the porch, his mother beside him. The sky was clear now. The smell of wet grass carried through the air. The news played faintly from a small TV inside. Segments about the trial, about the movement it sparked, about policy reviews and internal investigations. But he wasn't watching. He was fixing a small carburetor on the porch table, grease on his fingers again, like before all this began. His mother broke the silence first. "You changed things, you know." He shook his head gently. "No, Ma, I just reminded them what truth sounds like." She smiled faintly, tears in her eyes again, and for the first time in weeks, Raphael smiled too. Not the smile of victory, the smile of someone who'd survived being unheard, and somehow turned that silence into something louder than any speech. The camera could have pulled back right there. The boy and his mother sitting in the soft light, the house quiet, the world outside still learning to listen. Because in that silence, in that peace, was everything he fought for. He didn't change the system. He just reminded it what truth sounded like.